朋友们，大家好。今天看到一段视频，两位印度前海军高官在聊到上个月中国的076两栖攻击舰下水时，由衷的赞叹中国的造舰速度和规模相当了不起。不仅如此，在技术创新和前瞻性布局方面，更是走在世界前列，遥遥领先。感叹印度无论是在基础设施还是建造能力上，都还存在巨大差距。我们来看看他们是怎么说的。
But speaking of aircraft carriers and so on, I think we need to also focus our attention on what's happening with our northern neighbor.
Yes.
China already has 2 carriers out at sea. A third
Yes,
one is following. And you are a keen follower of developments in China. Can you throw some light on their latest endeavors?
Yes, sir. Firstly, of course, going back to the carriers which they're already existing, so you mentioned 2, and the third one I think just came back from a 6th round of sea trials. Maybe last week, if I'm not mistaken, or earlier this week. Interestingly, there were tire marks on the flight deck this time, so possibly they've either done touch and goes or maybe even traps in the last sortie that they've done. But the big ticket event, of course, which took place on the 27th of December, was the launch of the first Type 076. Quite a unique platform. Firstly, I thought I'll speak a little bit about the yards. This has been built by Hudong Chonghua. And Hudong Chonghua used to be in Pudong, up the Huangpu River in Shanghai. So that is a slightly constrained area because the river is slightly, I'm not too sure about the exact draft, but certainly it can't build these large-sized vessels, and even the dry dock there was limited in dimensions. So here on Changxing Island, again in Shanghai, right next to where JNCX, another large yard which is located, they've set up a subsidiary facility, I think, which is going to become their primary facilities, where 2 large pieces of maritime infrastructure. One is a huge wet basin, and the other is a brand new dry dock, which is around 450 meters by 90 meters. So it's a large dry dock. This construction of this facility started, I think, in roughly around 2021, the middle of 2021, and may have finished by around September 2023. And just as the cement had dried, or largely, I think a more correct term would be cured, they started construction of the 076 within maybe...
Not the 075? The predecessor to this?
No, this is the 076, first of class. So when you compare this vessel to the 075, and this was recently launched, as we know, on the 27th of December. When you compare this vessel to her predecessor, the 075...
These are amphibious
yes, sir. So these are like an LHD. She has a landing dock, and plus she has a strong aviation component, which we'll speak about, sir. But when you compare it to the 075, the 075 is 250 meters, this is roughly 260 meters. So in length, they're just marginally, but in her beam is much, much more, sir. The 075 is 30 meters, she's around 48 meters, sir. So it's a huge, tremendous increase in beam. The overall configuration has also changed. The 075 has a single island. This has got a twin island sort of structure. Propulsion, I think, has also changed, sir. On the 075 was diesel, and here some reports are saying that this is gas turbine, and maybe gas turbine with integrated electric propulsion. But the big ticket changes are on the aviation side of the house. So if you see, I mean, firstly, of course, is a flight deck. It's a through flight deck, not angled. They've got deck edge lifts, 2 of them, unlike the 075, which had, centerline lifts. And the biggest change, of course, is EMALS, where they've got a single catapult mounted on the port side, which is of the same dimensions as that of the Fujian. So this, I think, is going to be, it puts China in a different spot, where largely, one critique about China is that they copy the West. But here they seem to have broken out from that mold, and they're experimenting and seeing what you can do in different classes and how you can mix and merge. So here you've got a unique platform with a well deck, which can take LCACs with a strong aviation component, which can probably launch, drones, GJ-11, etc. They're talking about these drones, and maybe even more. But I thought, sir, since if you could tell us a little more about EMALS as a concept, sir, as to how does it change as compared to a steam-driven catapult, and what will bringing drones onto a float platform, how will that impact warfare at sea in the years to come?
Well, it's interesting that you use the term mix and match, because the Chinese seem to be doing it quite well. They have two objectives in front of them. One is to project A2AD against America, as a deterrent for any American invasion or so on. And the other objective, of course, is reoccupying Taiwan.
Yes.
So this kind of a platform, amphibious assault vessel or a landing platform dock, can be used now. The way they've configured it, it can be used in both objectives. Taiwan, Operation Taiwan, and against the Americas. The EMALS that you mentioned stands for Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System.
Right.
Now, historically, aircraft carriers or aircraft operating ships have used a catapult, which was generally a steam catapult. Good piece of equipment, but very complex, difficult to maintain, prone to breakdowns and so on. So about a decade ago, the Americans innovated this EMALS, which is an electrically driven mechanism which launches aircraft. It can be calibrated to the exact weight of the aircraft being launched. It imposes less stress on the aircraft airframe. So it has proved itself to be a much more useful, and it's less prone to breakdowns and simpler to maintain, etc. Of course, it requires a huge amount of electrical impulse for the ship to generate. So now an EMALS was first installed on a US aircraft carrier, Gerald Ford, I think few years ago, but they had a lot of teething troubles with it. In fact, at one point, I think President Trump said that we should discard it, but they didn't discard it, they've kept it. But to everyone's shock and surprise, the Chinese suddenly emerged with their own version of EMALS. Now, whether they did industrial espionage or invented on their own, it's a considerable achievement. So I believe it's been installed on their third aircraft carrier. But installing it on an amphibious assault ship is quite a unique thing. So what this will enable them to do is to launch, as you said, unmanned combat aircraft, and B, if they so desire, possibly they can actually launch manned aircraft also. So here it's an ideal device because UAVs are much lighter than compared to combat, and this can cope with both heavy aircraft and light aircraft. So it's a huge option, huge capability that the PLA Navy has acquired for itself, and it's taken everyone by surprise.
If I could interject, sir, and actually maybe this is the advantage of a late starter into carrier aviation, which allows them to sort of leapfrog past steam-driven catapults and jump straight into EMALS. But it speaks, I think, of the maturity of the program, that they have this confidence also that they could, skip that entire stage and jump straight in here.
Absolutely. Also using, you see, the fear is that aircraft carriers cannot afford to get too close to shore-based anti-air opposition. But if you're operating unmanned vehicles, UAVs, then you can stay offshore and launch them ahead of you. That gives you, the aircraft carrier gets many more options. So it's a great. But talking about shipbuilding, etc., when they launched this 076, I noticed they also launched 2 frigates at the same time, which they didn't publicize very much. But quite surprising that 3 major vessels should be launched on the same day. You know more about this?
So you have to give the Chinese credit for this. I mean, firstly, so when they started with the 076 in October sometime last year, in 2023, last year, at the same time, they actually started constructing 3 more frigates at that time. So in August 2024, that is around 8.5 months into the construction period, they flooded that dock.
I see.
Floated out the 3 frigates and docked.
Semi-constructed?
No, they were, I mean, sir, these days when you look at a Chinese vessel that is being floated out for the first time, it looks,
nearly complete.
80-90% fitted out, etc. So they floated them out and redocked the 076. And immediately after that, they started construction of 2 more frigates, and this would have been in August last year. And by come 27 December, while they were with the launch of the 076, those 2 were also launched. So it's a phenomenal construction rate, sir, where if you take the overall build period of around 14 months for the 076, they've done 5 frigates. The first 3 were done roughly, I would say, in around 8 to 9 months. But the second 2, 4.5 months flat, sir, from, lowering the blocks onto the dock floor to floating out the ship. Another unique thing, I think, where the Chinese have sort of done exceptionally well is on commonality, sir. So these are all 054 Alpha frigates.
Class.
Yes, sir. And some of them, I mean, these were initially all built for the Navy, but now they started using the same platform for the Coast Guard as well, sir. So this commonality of a single design, at least the weapon package might change and maybe some sensors might change. But if your basic propulsion train is the same, then it makes it so much easier to mass produce.
Common propulsion.
Yes, sir. So all that goes, and the numbers, of course, are astonishing. In the first round of the 054 Alphas, they built 30, sir. Then I think they built another 10 or 12 more, out of which 4 have gone, and plus 4 more for Pakistan. Now they've restarted again for the Coast Guard and for the Navy, where the numbers are not sure. So you're talking about a class of ships that might run into 50, 60 or something like that, which is quite phenomenal.
But a dismal fact is that when you talk about in terms of months for Chinese warship construction, we are talking about years where Indian shipyards are concerned. So can you put your finger on 1 or 2 factors which creates this huge vast void between us and them?
Yes, sir. So firstly, I would say is that our yards where we are, you have to increase yard productivity. I must say that a lot has been done in recent times, but of course, the distance to go is large as well. One is numbers, sir. I mean, if you build in 2s and 3s and 4s, it's always difficult to
but
streamline.
Capacity, do we have the capacity?
So once you streamline the design, then I think repeat orders become cheaper and cheaper because you learn from one iteration to the next, and you keep refining this process until you get better and better at it. Also, our shipyards, sir, they were built largely, they all built in British times, except for, I would say, Hindustan Shipyard, which I think maybe a little later.
Cochin
and Cochin as well, sir. Now, they are all built for making much smaller vessels, sir. And therefore, if you have smaller vessels, which your basic slipways and dry docks, etc., if they're only designed
for constrained for space also.
They're constrained for space and constrained for draft, sir.
Yeah.
Now, if you're constrained for draft, then your launch weight cannot exceed X amount, sir.
印度喜欢和中国比，而且往往还很不服气。但这一次中国的076型两栖攻击舰下水所带来的震撼，应该说是巨大的。印度军事评论界普遍认为，中国076型两栖攻击舰的下水，标志着中国海军在高端两栖作战能力上的又一重大进步，而印度在这一领域还处于连影子都看不到的阶段。印度海军一直梦想拥有类似美国黄蜂级或美利坚级的两栖攻击舰，能够搭载固定翼战机执行远程投送任务。但从2000年开始计划，20多年过去了，进展极为缓慢。到2024年，印度仍然没有开始任何两栖攻击舰的建造工作，甚至连具体的设计方案都还没有最终敲定。反观中国，自2019年开始下水首艘075以来，已有3艘075服役。如今带电磁弹射的076也已下水。关于电磁弹射，之前还有说中国是抄美国的，现在基本上都已改口或者闭嘴。美国用的是交流电，巨大的电力消耗必须依托核动力航母。我们技术创新用的是直流电，常规动力的003航母就可以带动。现在又把它用在076上，让外国一众专家目瞪口呆，哪里还有人敢指责中国抄袭？估计他们恨不得组团来学习。其实076的电磁弹射还不是焦点所在，毕竟003航母都已经在实际应用了。关键是在于076所代表的中国军工生产能力的飞跃。从开工到下水只用了13个月，这对于任何军事大国来说都算是一个奇迹。而印度第一艘国产航母维克兰特号建造周期从2009年到2022年，长达13年。服役后还因为舰载机的短缺，一直无法形成完整的战斗力。所以2位印度高官说，中国军舰的建造周期以月为单位，而印度是以年为单位，这么说一点也没夸张。军事能力是综合国力的体现。之前有对比中美造舰能力，好像说中国是美国的230多倍吧。虽然不知道这个数字是怎么得出来的，但它背后都是以中国国力的大幅上升为支撑。印度喜欢和中国比，可能以后比着比着就会发现，这样的比较其实没什么意义。